While my husband was fighting for his life against cancer, my son was on his honeymoon in the Maldives, posting pictures of crystal blue waters on Instagram. Before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're listening from. Enjoy the story. My name is Margaret Thompson, and for 52 years, I believed that being a good mother meant always putting my family first, no matter what it cost me personally. I'm a retired registered nurse who spent 3 decades caring for others, but nothing prepared me for watching my own husband, Robert, waste away during his brutal cancer treatment while our only son, David, chose paradise over family. It was a Tuesday morning when I received the call that would change everything. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm as he explained Robert's diagnosis: Stage 3, pancreatic cancer. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. After 28 years of marriage, my husband, my rock, my best friend, was facing a battle that statistics said he might not win. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital corridor, clutching my phone with trembling hands, trying to process the enormity of what lay ahead. Chemotherapy sessions twice a week, radiation treatments, countless doctor appointments, sleepless nights monitoring his pain levels and medication schedules. As a nurse, I understood the medical reality. As a wife, I was terrified. My first instinct was to call David. Surely our son, now 28 and a successful corporate lawyer, would want to know immediately. He'd always been Daddy's boy, following Robert to baseball games and learning to throw a perfect spiral in our backyard. I dialed his number with shaking fingers, expecting concern, maybe even tears. "Mom, can this wait? Jessica and I are in the middle of wedding planning meetings. The florist is here, and we're trying to finalize the centerpieces." His voice carried that familiar tone of impatience that had become increasingly common since he'd started dating Jessica 3 years ago. "David, honey, it's about your father. We just got some very serious news from the oncologist." "Oncologist? What's wrong with Dad?" For a moment, I heard a flicker of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys. I explained, Doctor Martinez's diagnosis as clearly as I could, fighting to keep my voice steady. The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Okay. Wow. That's really heavy, Mom. But you know Dad's tough, right? And you're a nurse. You've got this handled. Jessica and I can't really cancel our wedding plans now. We've got deposits down everywhere, and her parents flew in from California specifically for these meetings." The casual dismissal in his voice felt like ice water in my veins. "David, this is cancer we're talking about. Your father might—" "Mom, please don't be dramatic. Dad's going to fight this thing and win, just like he fights everything else. You worry too much. Look, I really need to go. The wedding planner is charging by the hour, and Jessica's getting stressed about the timeline. We'll call you later, okay?" The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone for several minutes, trying to reconcile the son I'd raised with the man who'd just dismissed his father's cancer diagnosis as an inconvenience to his wedding planning schedule. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of driving Robert to chemotherapy sessions alone, while David sent occasional text messages asking about Dad's progress between updates about wedding venue tastings and bachelor party plans. 3 months of sitting in waiting rooms, holding my husband's hand as poison coursed through his veins, designed to kill the cancer cells that were trying to steal him from me. Robert lost 40 pounds in those first 2 months. His thick brown hair, now silver at the temples, began falling out in clumps that I'd find on his pillow each morning. The man who had once carried me over the threshold of our first apartment now needed help walking to the bathroom some days. But through it all, he maintained his gentle smile and never complained, not even when the nausea from the chemo left him unable to keep down more than a few crackers and ginger ale. "Where's David?" he'd ask sometimes during the worst days, his voice barely above a whisper. I'd make excuses. "He's swamped at the law firm, honey. You know how demanding corporate law can be." Or, "He wanted to be here, but Jessica had a family emergency." always protecting our son's image, always making justifications for his absence. The truth was more painful than I wanted to admit, even to myself. David had become a stranger, someone who measured family obligations against personal convenience and consistently chose the latter. The wedding had consumed his entire world, leaving no room for anything as messy and inconvenient as his father's mortality. I found myself remembering the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings of our family holding hands. Where had that loving child gone? When did he become this cold, calculating person who viewed his parents as support staff rather than family? As I sat in another waiting room that Tuesday morning, watching other families navigate their own medical crises together, I realized something that made my chest tighten with a mixture of sadness and anger. I had spent 28 years being the kind of mother who never said no, never set boundaries, never demanded anything for myself. I had raised a son who expected unlimited access to my time, energy, and resources without offering anything in return. But what David didn't know, what no one in our family knew, was that I held more power than anyone realized. Power that could change everything with just one signature. I wasn't always the doormat I'd become. 28 years ago, when David was born after 3 miscarriages, I held that tiny, perfect baby in my arms and made a promise to give him everything I'd never had. My own mother had been distant and critical, always working double shifts at the textile factory to keep food on the table. I swore my son would know he was loved, wanted, and valued every single day of his life. Robert and I had been married for 2 years when David arrived, and we threw ourselves into parenthood with the enthusiasm of people who'd waited and hoped for so long. Robert would come home from his job at the insurance company and immediately reach for David, cooing over every tiny milestone. I'd watch them together, my husband making silly faces to earn our baby's first smile, teaching him to clap his hands, reading bedtime stories in different character voices, and my heart would overflow with happiness. As David grew, I made choice after choice that put his needs above everything else. When he wanted to play Little League but couldn't afford the equipment, I picked up extra nursing shifts at the hospital, working nights and weekends until I could buy him the best glove and cleats. When he decided he wanted to learn piano, I canceled my own pottery classes that I'd been attending for 2 years and used that money for his lessons instead. "Margaret, you don't have to give up everything for him," Robert would say gently when he'd find me exhausted after another 12-hour shift, still helping David with homework at the kitchen table. "He's our miracle baby," I'd remind him. After losing 3 pregnancies, having David feels like winning the lottery. I want to give him every opportunity I never had. And I did. When David's friends were getting part-time jobs in high school, I convinced Robert that our son should focus on his studies instead. I covered his car insurance, gas money, and spending cash so he could maintain his perfect GPA. When he got accepted to Northwestern University for pre-law, the tuition was staggering, nearly $40,000 a year. Other parents might have suggested community college for the first 2 years to save money, but not me. I liquidated my retirement savings account and took out a second mortgage on our house. Robert was hesitant about the debt, but I convinced him it was an investment in David's future. "He'll be a lawyer," I'd say. "He'll make enough money to pay us back and then some." During his college years, David would call home every Sunday, usually when he needed something. More money for textbooks that seemed suspiciously expensive. Cash for a spring break trip to Cancun that was educational because he was taking a Spanish class. Funding for an unpaid internship at a prestigious firm that required him to live in Manhattan for a summer. Each request was accompanied by expressions of gratitude and promises that he'd make us proud. "You're the best parents in the world," he'd say. "I'm going to take care of you guys when I'm making the big bucks. You'll never have to worry about money again." I believed him completely. When Robert would occasionally question whether we were spoiling David, I'd defend our son fiercely. "He appreciates everything we do for him. You see how grateful he is. He's going to be a wonderful success, and then he'll help us the way we're helping him now. After graduation, David landed a position at Morrison, Klein & Associates, a corporate law firm in Chicago. His starting salary was impressive, more money than Robert and I made combined. But somehow, David still needed financial assistance. First-year lawyers work such long hours, he explained. He couldn't afford his own apartment in a safe neighborhood near the firm. Could we help with rent for just a few months until he got established? Those few months turned into 2 years. The rent checks were accompanied by explanations about law school loans, professional wardrobe costs, networking expenses, and the need to live up to certain standards in his career field. Robert and I were still paying off the second mortgage from his college education, but I couldn't bear the thought of David struggling. Then came Jessica. David met her at a firm holiday party. She was the daughter of a client, a 25-year-old marketing coordinator with expensive tastes and definite opinions about her social status. Within 6 months, David's requests for money increased dramatically. Romantic dinners at 5-star restaurants, weekend getaways to wine country, jewelry for special occasions. "She's the one, Mom," David told me during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. Jessica comes from a family with connections. Her father owns a chain of luxury car dealerships. Dating her is actually good for my career. When David proposed to Jessica after dating her for 18 months, the wedding planning began immediately. Jessica had very specific ideas about what constituted an appropriate celebration of their union. The venue alone cost more than Robert's annual salary. The dress was custom designed. The catering featured a 7-course dinner with premium wine pairings. Her parents are covering most of it, David assured us, but they expect us to contribute our share. It would be embarrassing if we couldn't match their investment in the wedding. Our share turned out to be $35,000, money we didn't have without liquidating what remained of our savings and taking cash advances on credit cards. Robert and I sat at our kitchen table, looking at the numbers, both of us knowing we were making a terrible financial decision, but neither willing to disappoint our son. "Maybe we should talk to him about having a smaller wedding," Robert suggested quietly. "Jessica's family will think we're cheap," I replied. "David's reputation could be damaged. This is his career we're talking about." So we paid. We smiled at the engagement party and praised Jessica's wedding planning skills. We admired her diamond ring that cost more than our car and congratulated David on his good fortune in finding such a sophisticated woman. But I noticed changes in David during the engagement period. He became impatient with Robert's stories about work. He'd check his phone constantly during our dinners together, responding to Jessica's texts about wedding details. When we'd try to share news about our lives, my retirement from nursing, Robert's promotion at the insurance company, David would listen with half his attention, already formulating his response about his own much more important concerns. "Jessica thinks we should honeymoon in the Maldives," he announced one Sunday. "It's expensive, but her sorority sister went there last year and said it was life-changing. We want to start our marriage with an unforgettable experience." The honeymoon cost another $12,000, money that came from our home equity line of credit, which I opened without telling Robert the full extent of how much we'd already borrowed against our house. I justified it by telling myself that David deserved happiness after working so hard to build his career. What I didn't realize was that I had trained my son to see me as an endless source of financial and emotional support without any expectation of reciprocity. I had spent 28 years teaching David that my needs were always secondary to his, that my resources were always available for his dreams, and that my love was unconditional regardless of how he treated me in return. The irony was devastating. In my determination to give David everything I'd never had, I had created exactly the kind of selfish, entitled person my own mother had worked so hard to prevent me from becoming. The first sign that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic came 3 weeks after Robert's diagnosis. I was sitting beside his hospital bed, holding his hand as he recovered from a particularly brutal chemotherapy session, when my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, Jessica and I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet us for lunch tomorrow? It's about the wedding timeline." I stared at the message, incredulous. Robert was barely conscious, his skin gray and clammy from the treatment, and our son wanted to discuss wedding logistics. I typed back quickly, "Dad's having a rough day. Can we talk later this week?" The response came immediately. "This can't wait. Jessica's parents are flying back to California on Wednesday, and we need to finalize everything. 1 o'clock at Chez Laurent. Don't be late. We have a venue walkthrough at 3. Robert squeezed my hand weakly. "Go ahead, sweetheart," he whispered. "David needs you." The restaurant David had chosen was one of those places where the cheapest entree cost $40. Jessica was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through her phone while David studied a leather-bound wine menu. Neither of them looked up when I approached the table. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late," I said, settling into my chair. "The parking was—" "Mom, we need to move the wedding up by 2 months," David interrupted. "Jessica's uncle can only officiate in June, and her cousin is graduating from Stanford that same weekend. It's the only time that works for everyone important." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "David, that's only 4 months away, and with your father's treatment schedule—" "That's actually what we wanted to talk to you about," Jessica said, finally looking up from her phone. Her tone was businesslike, as if she were discussing a minor scheduling conflict at work. "We know this is a difficult time with Robert's health issues, but we can't let that derail our entire future." Health issues. She referred to Robert's cancer, her future father-in-law's battle for his life, as health issues. "We've already put deposits down on everything," David continued. "The venue, the caterer, the band. If we don't lock in June, we'll lose thousands of dollars and have to start over. You understand that, right?" What I understood was that my husband was fighting for his life, and our son was worried about losing wedding deposits. "David, I don't know if your father will be strong enough to walk you down the aisle in June. The treatment protocol runs for 6 months and—" "Mom, you're being overly dramatic again," David said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of irritation. "Dad's going to be fine. He's tough. And if he's having a bad day, he can just sit during the ceremony. Uncle Mike could walk Jessica down the aisle instead." The casual way he dismissed his father's role in the wedding felt like a physical slap. Uncle Mike was Jessica's father's brother, a man David had met exactly twice. "Besides," Jessica added, "we've already sent save the dates to 300 people. It would be embarrassing to change everything now because of one person's medical situation." One person. She was referring to Robert, the man who had paid for their engagement party, who had welcomed her into our family with open arms, who had spent countless evenings listening to her wedding planning details with genuine interest, as one person whose cancer was inconveniencing her social schedule. Over the following weeks, the pattern became clear. David would call or text only when he needed something from me, and those needs were increasingly demanding. Could I pick up the wedding favors from the engraver because he and Jessica were both too busy with work? Could I handle the final tasting with the caterer since they had a couple's massage appointment they couldn't reschedule? Could I coordinate with the florist about the centerpieces because Jessica found the woman absolutely exhausting to deal with? Each request came with the assumption that I had unlimited time and energy, despite the fact that I was managing Robert's complex medical schedule, driving him to appointments, monitoring his medications, and handling all the household responsibilities he could no longer manage. When I tried to explain that I couldn't take on wedding planning tasks because of Robert's needs, David's responses became increasingly cold. "Mom, I understand Dad is sick, but this is my wedding. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and you're making it all about his cancer. Can't you just be happy for me for once?" The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally unfair. I had spent 28 years making everything about David's happiness. Now, when his father was fighting for his life, I was being selfish for prioritizing Robert's medical care over wedding planning duties. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in February. Robert had been admitted to the hospital that morning with severe dehydration and complications from his latest round of chemotherapy. I had spent the entire day by his bedside, watching monitors, speaking with doctors, and trying to help him manage the pain that left him unable to sleep or eat. At 7:30 that evening, as I was helping Robert sip small amounts of water and ice chips, David called. "Mom, we have a crisis. The wedding venue double-booked our date, and we need to choose between 3 alternative dates they're offering. Jessica is freaking out, and we need you to come look at the contracts tonight so we can decide which option works best." I looked at my husband, who was struggling to keep his eyes open, his breathing shallow and labored. "David, your father is in the hospital. I can't leave him right now." "Come on, Mom. Dad's in good hands with the nurses. This will only take an hour, and it's really important. Jessica's parents are conference calling in from California at 9 to help us decide. We need you here." "I'm not leaving your father alone in the hospital to review wedding contracts." "Fine. Then just tell me what you think over the phone. The dates are June 15th, June 22nd, or July 6th. Which one works better with Dad's treatment schedule?" The question revealed the depth of David's misunderstanding about cancer treatment. As if chemotherapy operated on a predictable calendar that could accommodate social events. As if we could plan around the disease that was trying to kill his father. "David, I can't predict how your father will feel on any given day. That's not how cancer works." "Okay, then just pick one. You're overthinking this. Dad will be fine by then." The casual confidence in his voice, the absolute certainty that his father would be fine, based on nothing but wishful thinking and social convenience, made my hands shake with anger. "I have to go, David. Your father needs me." "Mom, wait. Don't hang up. This is important. Your father dying is important. Your wedding can wait until tomorrow." I ended the call and turned my phone to silent. For the rest of that evening, I focused entirely on Robert, helping him through waves of nausea and holding his hand when the pain medication made him confused and frightened. Around midnight, when he finally fell into a restless sleep, I checked my phone. 17 missed calls from David, 23 text messages, escalating from pleading to demanding to angry. The final message, sent at 11:47 p.m., read, "Thanks for nothing, Mom. Jessica thinks you don't want us to get married. Way to make our engagement about Dad's illness. Really selfish." Selfish. After 28 years of putting David first in everything, after sacrificing my retirement savings and our financial security for his education and wedding, after giving him every advantage I could provide, I was selfish for choosing to stay with my dying husband instead of reviewing wedding venue contracts. The wedding took place on June 15th, exactly as David and Jessica had planned. Robert, bless his heart, mustered every ounce of strength he had to walk our son down the aisle. I'll never forget the image of my husband, 40 pounds lighter and wearing a suit that now hung loose on his diminished frame, gripping David's arm, not just for emotional support, but for physical stability. The ceremony was beautiful. Jessica had spared no expense in creating her perfect day. But what should have been a celebration of love and family felt hollow to me. Throughout the reception, I watched David and Jessica pose for photographs, accept congratulations, and bask in the attention of their 300 guests. Robert managed to stay for the first dance before exhaustion forced us to leave early. "I'm proud of him," Robert whispered to me as we sat in our car outside the reception hall, too tired to drive home immediately. "Our boy looked so handsome up there." I nodded and squeezed his hand, but inside, I felt a growing sense of disconnection from the son I'd raised. David had barely spoken to us beyond the required family photographs and the ceremonial father-son dance that lasted less than 2 minutes before Robert had to sit down. 3 days after the wedding, David and Jessica left for their 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. The day they departed, Robert had his worst reaction yet to the chemotherapy. I found him collapsed on our bathroom floor at 6 a.m, unable to stand due to severe dizziness and dehydration. The ambulance ride to the hospital was terrifying. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and the paramedics couldn't get a clear response from him about his pain level. Dr. Martinez met us in the emergency room with a grim expression. "Margaret, we need to discuss adjusting Robert's treatment plan." His body is struggling to handle the current protocol, and we're seeing some concerning changes in his liver function. For the next 48 hours, I lived at the hospital. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness, and when he was awake, he was often confused and disoriented from the medications. The oncology team ran test after test, trying to determine whether the treatment was helping or hurting him at this point. On the second night, around 3 a.m., Robert suddenly became alert and lucid. He reached for my hand with surprising strength. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in weeks. "If this treatment isn't working, I don't want to keep fighting just to fight. I want whatever time I have left to be with you, really with you, not in hospitals and doctors' offices." The conversation we'd both been avoiding finally happened. Robert was tired, not just physically, but emotionally exhausted from the battle. He wanted to consider stopping the aggressive treatment and focusing on comfort care instead. It was the most difficult discussion of our 28-year marriage, but also the most honest. "What about David?" I asked. "Shouldn't we talk to him about this decision?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Where is David, Margaret? I've been in the hospital for 3 days, and our son hasn't even called to check on me." The truth hit me like a physical blow. David had no idea his father was facing a potential life-or-death medical crisis because he was completely unreachable on his honeymoon. When I'd tried to contact him through the resort's emergency line, I was told that Mr. and Mrs. Thompson had specifically requested no interruptions unless it was an absolute emergency involving death or natural disaster. I stared at my husband, the man who had worked double shifts to pay for David's college education, who had walked him down the aisle just 5 days earlier, despite being barely able to stand, and realized our son had essentially told the world that nothing short of his father's actual death was important enough to disturb his vacation. "I think we need to make decisions based on what's best for us, not what David might want," Robert said softly. "He's got his own life now, his own family." The next morning, I tried calling David again. This time I reached him. "Mom, what's up? You're calling early. Everything okay?" His voice was cheerful and relaxed, with tropical music and laughter audible in the background. "David, your father is in the hospital. He's been here for 3 days with serious complications from his treatment. We need to talk about some important medical decisions, and I think you should come home." There was a pause, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background. "Who is it? We're supposed to be at the snorkeling excursion in 10 minutes. Mom, how serious are we talking? Like life or death serious? Or just another round of chemo side effects?" The casual way he asked whether his father was dying made my blood run cold. "David, the doctors are concerned about his liver function. We're discussing whether to continue the aggressive treatment or switch to palliative care." Another pause. More background chatter from Jessica about missing their scheduled activities. "Okay, look, Mom. I hear you, and I'm really sorry Dad's having a rough time. But Jessica and I are literally halfway around the world, and we paid $12,000 for this honeymoon. We can't just fly home every time Dad has a bad reaction to chemo. You said yourself he's had tough days before and bounced back. This is different, David." "How is it different? You're a nurse. You know how to handle medical situations. Dad's in the hospital with doctors taking care of him. There's nothing I could do there that isn't already being done. And honestly, Mom, Jessica is really stressed about missing our planned excursions. This honeymoon was supposed to be our time to relax after all the wedding stress." I sat in that hospital corridor, listening to my son explain why his tropical vacation was more important than his father's potential death. And something fundamental shifted inside me. For 28 years, I had made excuses for David's selfishness. I had convinced myself that he was just young, just focused on his career, just adjusting to married life. But this wasn't about youth or career or marriage stress. This was about character. This was about a man who could justify abandoning his dying father because it might interfere with snorkeling lessons and beach cocktails. "David, I need you to understand something clearly," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Your father may not have much time left. If you choose to stay on your honeymoon instead of coming home to see him, you may not get another chance. Mom, you're being dramatic again. Dad's not dying. He's sick, but he's tough. He'll get through this like he gets through everything else. Look, I've got to go. Jessica's getting upset about being late. We'll call you tomorrow, okay? Give Dad my love. The line went dead. I looked at my phone for a long moment, then walked back into Robert's room. He was awake, watching the door hopefully. Was that David? Is he coming home? I sat down beside his bed and took his hand. No, honey, he's not coming home. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't make an excuse for our son. I didn't explain or justify or soften his words. Robert deserved the truth, even if it hurt. Robert nodded slowly, and I saw something change in his eyes. Not surprise, but a kind of sad acceptance. Then it's just us, he said quietly. It's just us. That night, as I sat beside Robert's bed listening to his labored breathing and watching the monitors track his vital signs, I made a decision. For 28 years, I had prioritized my son's happiness over everything else, including my own dignity and my husband's needs. I had trained David to see me as an endless resource, always available, always willing to sacrifice. But I was done being taken for granted. I was done being treated like hired help by the child I had raised and supported and loved unconditionally. David had made his choice. Jessica and tropical vacations were more important than family. It was time for me to make some choices of my own. Robert came home from the hospital after 5 days, and we made the decision together to transition from aggressive treatment to comfort care. It wasn't giving up. It was choosing quality over quantity, choosing to spend his remaining time as a husband and father instead of as a patient. The relief in his eyes when Dr. Martinez agreed to the new approach told me we were making the right choice. With the daily medical appointments reduced to twice-weekly check-ins and pain management consultations, I suddenly had time to think about things I'd been putting off for months. The stack of unopened mail on my desk had grown embarrassingly high. Bills, statements, and documents I'd been too exhausted to address while juggling Robert's care and David's wedding demands. One evening, while Robert napped peacefully in his recliner, I finally tackled the paperwork pile. Most of it was routine: utility bills, insurance statements, credit card offers. But buried in the middle was a thick envelope from Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled my grandmother's estate 15 years earlier. I almost threw it away, assuming it was some kind of follow-up paperwork or annual statement I'd forgotten about. But something made me open it instead. Inside was a letter from James Morrison himself, along with several official-looking documents. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," the letter began, "I hope this correspondence finds you well. As we discussed during our meeting in 2008, I'm writing to inform you of some significant developments regarding your grandmother's estate and the investments that have been managed in trust for your benefit." I stared at the letter, confused. My grandmother had left me a small inheritance when she died. Enough to help with David's college expenses, but nothing substantial. Certainly nothing that required ongoing management by a law firm. The original bequest of $400,000 has been carefully invested according to your grandmother's specific instructions, with all gains automatically reinvested for maximum growth. I'm pleased to report that the current value of your inheritance has reached approximately $1,200,000. The words blurred in front of my eyes. I read the sentence 3 times before it began to register. $1,200,000. Money that belonged to me, that I had completely forgotten about because I'd been so focused on David's needs and Robert's illness. The letter continued. Additionally, the property investments your grandmother made on your behalf have appreciated significantly. The rental properties in downtown Chicago that were purchased with part of your inheritance are now valued at approximately $800,000, with current rental income of $4,000 per month being automatically deposited into the trust account. I set the letter down with shaking hands. Rental income. $4,000 a month for 15 years, and I had never seen a penny of it because it was all being reinvested according to my grandmother's wishes. The attached documents painted an even more startling picture. Bank statements showing monthly deposits I'd never noticed. Investment portfolios I didn't remember authorizing. Property deeds with my name listed as owner for buildings I'd never even seen. My grandmother, it turned out, had been far wealthier than any of us knew. She'd lived modestly in her small apartment, working at the post office until she was 75, but she'd been quietly investing her money for decades. When she died, she'd left everything to me with specific instructions that it should be managed professionally and allowed to grow until I either reached age 55 or experienced a major life change that required financial resources. Robert stirred in his chair, and I quickly gathered the papers, my mind reeling. How had I forgotten about this? How had I spent 15 years struggling with mortgages and credit card debt and second jobs when I had nearly $2 million sitting in accounts with my name on them? The answer was painfully obvious. I'd been so consumed with providing for David, his education, his career, his wedding, his lifestyle, that I'd never taken time to understand my own financial situation. When the lawyers had explained the trust arrangements after my grandmother's funeral, I'd been pregnant with worry about David's college applications and Robert's job security. I'd signed whatever they put in front of me and promptly forgot about it. That night, after Robert went to bed early, I spread the documents across our kitchen table and really studied them for the first time. The numbers were staggering. Not only did I have nearly $2 million in various accounts, but I also owned 3 rental properties that generated steady income and had appreciated dramatically in value. More shocking was the realization that David had no idea any of this existed. For his entire adult life, he'd believed that Robert and I were financially stretched, living paycheck to paycheck, sacrificing our own security for his education and career. He'd watched us take out second mortgages and liquidate retirement accounts to pay for his needs, never knowing that I could have covered all of those expenses without any hardship at all. But perhaps most revealing was what this meant about our recent financial struggles. The $35,000 we'd borrowed for David's wedding, the $12,000 for his honeymoon, the years of rent subsidies and living expenses we'd covered while he established his career. All of it had come from Robert's salary and our primary savings, while millions of dollars sat untouched in accounts I'd forgotten existed. I had chosen to sacrifice Robert's comfort and our financial stability rather than dip into money that was rightfully mine, all because I'd been too overwhelmed with caretaking responsibilities to pay attention to my own resources. The irony was almost too much to process. David saw me as financially dependent, someone who needed his future success to secure my old age. Jessica viewed me as a working-class mother-in-law whose contributions to their wedding had probably been a significant sacrifice. They both treated me like someone whose time and energy were limitless because my own resources and opportunities were so limited. They had no idea that I could have bought their wedding venue outright without touching my investment principal. The next morning, I called Morrison & Associates and scheduled an appointment with James Morrison. It was time to understand exactly what I owned and what options I had. For 15 years, I'd let other people manage money I'd forgotten I had. But things were about to change. When I hung up the phone, Robert was watching me from the doorway, looking more alert than he'd seemed in weeks. "Important call?" he asked. "Very important," I replied. "Robert, I need to tell you something. We're not as financially vulnerable as we thought we were." I showed him the documents, watching his face change from confusion to amazement to something that looked almost like relief. "Margaret, this is incredible. But why didn't we know about this sooner?" "Because I was so busy taking care of everyone else that I forgot to take care of myself." Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying the investment statements. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time I started making some decisions based on what's best for us, not what's most convenient for David." "And what would be best for us?" I looked at my husband, the man who had worked extra hours to help pay for our son's education, while I had millions of dollars sitting in investment accounts. The man who had worried about our financial security during his illness, while I owned rental properties, generating thousands of dollars in monthly income. I think it's time David learned that his mother isn't as helpless as he thinks she is. My appointment with James Morrison was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Robert insisted on coming with me despite his fatigue, saying he wanted to understand our full financial picture before making any major decisions about his care or our future. I was grateful for his support. After 28 years of making financial choices based on David's needs, I felt overwhelmed by the prospect of managing significant wealth. Morrison & Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise. The law firm's reception area was all marble and mahogany, with original oil paintings and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. I felt underdressed in my simple navy dress and cardigan, but James Morrison greeted us warmly as if we were his most important clients. "Margaret, Robert, please come in. I'm so glad you finally reached out. I've been hoping we'd have this conversation for years." His office overlooked Lake Michigan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the room feel suspended in the sky. Morrison was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that spoke of decades of successful legal practice. "I have to admit, James, I'm embarrassed that I forgot about so much of this," I said, as he gestured for us to sit in chairs facing his massive desk. "The last 15 years have been focused on family responsibilities, and I lost track of the financial details." "That's completely understandable," Morrison replied, pulling out a thick file folder. "Your grandmother specifically designed the trust to operate independently during your child-rearing years. She believed you should be free to focus on family without worrying about investment decisions. But she also knew that eventually you'd need access to these resources." He opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. "Let me walk you through exactly what you own." The numbers were even more impressive than I'd initially understood. The original inheritance of $400,000 had grown to $1.3 million through careful investment in mutual funds, bonds, and blue-chip stocks. The rental properties, 3 buildings in gentrifying neighborhoods, were now worth $950,000 combined and generated $4,200 in monthly rental income. "But there's more," Morrison continued. "Your grandmother also established a separate education fund that was designed to mature when your children reached college age. You accessed part of that fund 15 years ago for David's undergraduate expenses, but the remainder has continued growing." He showed me statements for an account I vaguely remembered signing paperwork for when David started Northwestern. The balance was $340,000. "I'm confused," I said. "We took out loans and mortgages to pay for David's education and wedding. Why didn't anyone tell me this money was available?" Morrison looked uncomfortable. "We sent annual statements and several letters suggesting meetings to discuss accessing these funds. But you never responded, so we assumed you preferred to let the investments continue growing rather than liquidate them for immediate expenses." Robert leaned forward. "Margaret, do you remember getting those letters?" I thought back to the chaos of the last several years. David's law school applications, his job search, wedding planning, Robert's diagnosis. I probably threw them away thinking they were just routine financial updates. I never imagined they were suggesting I could access the money. "The total value of all your assets," Morrison said, "including the trust fund, rental properties, and education account, is approximately $2.6 million. Additionally, you have $4,200 in monthly rental income that's been accumulating in a separate account for years. That account currently holds $127,000 in rental payments you never claimed." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped Robert's hand, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. I wasn't just financially secure, I was wealthy. Wealthy enough that David's education and wedding expenses represented less than 5% of my total assets. "What does this mean practically?" Robert asked. "What options does Margaret have?" Morrison smiled. "It means Margaret has complete financial independence. She can access any or all of these funds at any time. She can redirect the rental income to her personal accounts. She can sell the properties if she chooses. The trust was designed to give her maximum flexibility once she reached age 50 or experienced significant life changes. And David? I asked quietly. Does he have any legal claim to these assets? None whatsoever. Your grandmother's will was very specific. This inheritance belongs solely to you, with full discretion over how it's used or distributed. If you choose to share it with family members, that's entirely your decision. But legally, David has no more claim to these assets than any stranger on the street. Over the next hour, Morrison walked us through various options for managing the wealth. I could maintain the current investment strategy and live comfortably off the rental income. I could liquidate some assets to pay off our mortgage and credit card debt immediately. I could establish my own trust funds for future grandchildren or charitable donations or any other purpose I chose. Most importantly, he explained the legal mechanisms for changing beneficiaries on various accounts and updating my will to reflect my current priorities rather than assumptions I'd made 15 years earlier. I'd like to make some changes, I said finally. I want to update all the beneficiary information and establish new distribution priorities. Of course. What changes did you have in mind? I looked at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. I want to ensure that my husband is the primary beneficiary of everything. After that, I want to establish conditions for any inheritance David might receive. What kind of conditions? I want him to demonstrate respect and responsibility before inheriting anything. This money should go to someone who values family, not someone who treats his parents like employees. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. We can certainly structure the inheritance with performance requirements, regular family contact, care during illness, demonstrated appreciation for family relationships. Many of our clients establish similar provisions. I also want to transfer the rental income to our regular checking account, starting immediately. And I'd like to pay off our mortgage and credit cards using funds from the trust. That can all be arranged this week. As we prepared to leave, Morrison handed me a business card for Sarah Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in helping women manage inherited wealth. Sarah has been working with female clients for 20 years, he said. She can help you develop a long-term strategy that aligns your financial resources with your personal values and family goals. Driving home, Robert was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. How do you feel about all of this? Overwhelmed. Angry at myself for not paying attention sooner, but also, I paused, trying to find the right words. Powerful. For the first time in years, I feel like I have choices. What kind of choices? The choice to stop sacrificing our financial security for David's comfort. The choice to prioritize our marriage and your health over his demands. The choice to require respect instead of just hoping for it. That evening, I called Sarah Chen and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Then I sat down with our household bills, the mortgage payment, credit card balances, and medical expenses that had been causing me stress for months, and realized that all of our financial pressures could be eliminated with a single phone call to the trust manager. For 28 years, I had operated from a position of perceived scarcity, always worried about money, always sacrificing my own needs to ensure David had opportunities. But scarcity had been an illusion. I had been wealthy for 15 years without realizing it, allowing my son to exploit what he thought was my financial vulnerability while millions of dollars accumulated in accounts I'd forgotten I owned. David had built his entire relationship with me around the assumption that I needed his eventual success to secure my future. Jessica had married into what she thought was a middle-class family, where resources were limited and her sophisticated tastes represented a step up for everyone. They were both about to discover how wrong they'd been. David and Jessica returned from their honeymoon on a Thursday, tanned and relaxed, their social media accounts filled with pictures of overwater bungalows and sunset dinners. They didn't call or visit to check on Robert's condition. Instead, David sent a text message on Friday afternoon. Back from paradise. Hope Dad's feeling better. Jessica and I want to come by Sunday for dinner. She's excited to show you wedding photos and talk about thank you cards. The casual assumption that we would be available for their social visit, combined with the complete lack of concern about Robert's health crisis during their absence, crystallized everything that was wrong with our family dynamic. For 28 years, I had trained David to believe that his parents existed primarily to serve his needs and accommodate his schedule. "What do you think?" Robert asked when I showed him the text. He was having a good day, alert and comfortable in his favorite chair with minimal pain medication. "I think it's time for some changes," I replied. I texted back, "Sunday doesn't work for us. Robert needs rest, and I have other commitments. We can arrange a visit when it's convenient for everyone." My phone rang within 5 minutes. "Mom, what do you mean Sunday doesn't work? We already told Jessica's parents we'd have family dinner and show them the photos. What other commitments could you possibly have?" The tone was familiar, that mix of irritation and entitlement that had become David's default whenever anyone disrupted his plans. But this time, instead of apologizing and rearranging our schedule, I held firm. "David, your father was in the hospital for 5 days while you were gone. He's recovering, and our priority right now is his health and comfort, not social obligations. I thought you said he was doing better. Are you telling me Dad's worse than you let on? I'm telling you that we need advance notice for visits, and we need them to be brief and focused on what's best for your father, not what's convenient for you and Jessica." There was a pause. "Mom, this is weird. You're acting like, I don't know, like we're strangers or something. We're family. We shouldn't need to schedule formal visits to see each other. Family members who care about each other check in when someone is hospitalized. Family members don't disappear for 2 weeks when their father is making difficult medical decisions. We were on our honeymoon. You knew we'd be unreachable. And honestly, Mom, you're being kind of manipulative here. Dad's fine, and you're acting like we abandoned him on his deathbed." The accusation of manipulation was particularly galling, coming from someone who had spent years manipulating my guilt and love to extract financial support and emotional labor without offering anything in return. "David, we can visit next Saturday afternoon for 2 hours. That gives your father time to rest and gives us time to prepare for company." 2 hours? Mom, come on. We want to have a nice long family dinner, catch up properly, show you all our photos and souvenirs. 2 hours isn't enough time for a real visit. 2 hours is what we're offering. If that doesn't work for you, we can try again the following weekend. Another pause, longer this time. "I need to talk to Jessica about this. She's not going to understand why you're being so rigid about family time." "Jessica will understand if you explain that your father is recovering from a serious health crisis and needs a calm, low-stress environment." "Fine. I'll call you back." He didn't call back. Instead, Jessica called an hour later. "Margaret, hi. David explained that you're worried about Robert's energy levels, which is totally understandable. But I was thinking, what if we brought dinner instead of you cooking? That way you wouldn't have any stress or preparation, and we could still have our family time." Jessica's tone was perfectly pleasant, but underneath, I could hear the assumption that my concerns were really about cooking logistics, rather than genuine boundaries around Robert's health needs. "That's thoughtful, Jessica. But the issue isn't meal preparation. Robert tires easily, and long visits are difficult for him right now." "Oh. Well, what if we came earlier in the day, like a lunch instead of dinner? We're available Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. That's what works for Robert's schedule. 2 to 4? That's such a short window. We have so much to share with you, and I was hoping Robert could tell us more about his treatment progress. Plus, I brought you both gifts from the Maldives." The manipulation was subtle, but unmistakable. Jessica was positioning herself as the thoughtful daughter-in-law who cared about Robert's treatment, while framing my boundaries as unreasonable obstacles to family connection. 2 to 4 on Saturday, or we can try another weekend when you have more flexibility." "Well, okay, I guess that works. But Margaret, can I ask you something? David feels like you're upset with us about the timing of our honeymoon. Are you angry that we weren't here when Robert was in the hospital?" The directness of the question surprised me. "Jessica, Robert was in the hospital for 5 days with potentially life-threatening complications. During that time, David made it clear that his vacation was more important than his father's medical crisis. So yes, I'm disappointed in his priorities. But Margaret, we couldn't have done anything to help even if we'd been here. You're a nurse. You know how to handle medical situations, and canceling our honeymoon would have cost us thousands of dollars in change fees and lost deposits. There it was, the fundamental disconnect. Jessica genuinely believed that financial inconvenience justified abandoning a dying family member. She couldn't understand that presence during crisis wasn't about practical help. It was about love, commitment, and showing that family relationships mattered more than vacation plans. Jessica, I hope you never have to experience what it's like to face the possibility of losing your spouse while your only child prioritizes recreation over family. That's not fair. We didn't prioritize recreation. We prioritized our marriage and our financial investment in the honeymoon. That's responsible adult behavior. I think we have different definitions of responsible adult behavior. The conversation ended shortly after that, and I didn't hear from either David or Jessica for the rest of the week. On Saturday morning, David called to confirm their visit, but mentioned that Jessica wasn't feeling well and would be staying home. "She's disappointed," he said. "She was really looking forward to showing you the photos and giving you the gifts we brought back. I'm sorry she's not feeling well. We'll look forward to seeing her another time." "Mom, can I ask you something? Jessica thinks you don't like her. She feels like you're making these scheduling restrictions because you're trying to limit our visits." "David, I'm making these restrictions because your father is sick and needs a calm environment. This has nothing to do with Jessica personally." "But you were kind of harsh with her on the phone. She was just trying to be flexible and work with your schedule." The conversation revealed how completely David misunderstood the situation. He genuinely believed that Jessica's willingness to bring dinner or change the mealtime represented meaningful accommodation, while my insistence on time limits was unreasonable rigidity. When David arrived that Saturday, alone, he seemed subdued and uncertain. For the first time in years, he appeared to be questioning whether his usual approach to family relationships was working. "How's Dad really doing?" he asked as we sat in the living room while Robert rested. "He's chosen to stop the aggressive treatment and focus on comfort care. We're taking it one day at a time." "How long do the doctors think?" "We don't know. Maybe months, maybe longer. The important thing is that he's comfortable and that we spend quality time together." David was quiet for a long moment. "I should have come home from the honeymoon when you called." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from him in years. "Yes, you should have." Jessica didn't understand why it was such a big deal. She thought you were being overly dramatic about Dad's condition. "What do you think, David?" I think maybe I've gotten used to assuming you can handle everything on your own." "But that's not really fair, is it?" It was a small crack in his defensive justifications, but it was something. "No, it's not fair, and it's not sustainable anymore." That visit lasted exactly 2 hours, as I'd specified. When David left, he seemed thoughtful rather than angry. It was the first time in years that I'd maintained a boundary with him without apologizing or explaining myself extensively. More importantly, it was the first time I'd said no to David without feeling guilty about disappointing him. The temporary peace following David's solo visit lasted exactly 12 days. On a Tuesday evening, as Robert and I were enjoying a quiet dinner and discussing plans for a small garden renovation project, my phone exploded with an urgent call from David. "Mom, we have a serious problem. Jessica and I looked at our finances, and we're in trouble. The honeymoon cost more than we budgeted, and her car needs major repairs. We need to borrow $15,000, just temporarily, until my next bonus comes through." The request was delivered with David's usual assumption that our resources were automatically available for his financial emergencies. But this time, instead of panicking about how to help, I felt calm and clear about my response. "No, David, we can't lend you that amount of money." The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "I'm sorry, what? Did you say no?" "Yes, I said no. We can't lend you $15,000. Mom, I don't think you understand. This isn't for something frivolous. Jessica's car broke down completely. The transmission is shot. She needs a car to get to work. And the honeymoon expenses. Well, we put some things on credit cards expecting to pay them off with my bonus, but the firm pushed bonus payments back to December. I understand the situation, David, but we can't help with this amount of money." "What do you mean you can't? Are you guys in financial trouble? Is it Dad's medical bills?" It would have been easy to use Robert's illness as an excuse to let David believe that medical expenses were straining our budget. But I was done making excuses and hiding behind circumstances. "We're not in financial trouble. I'm choosing not to lend you this money." "Choosing not to? Mom, this is really important. We're talking about Jessica's ability to get to work, which affects our household income. This impacts our ability to pay rent and basic expenses." "David, you're 28 years old with a law degree and a good job. These are your financial responsibilities to manage." "I can't believe this." "For my entire life, you've helped whenever I needed it. You paid for college, helped with law school expenses, covered wedding costs. Now suddenly you're acting like $15,000 is some huge burden." The entitlement in his voice was staggering. He genuinely couldn't understand why I might choose to say no after years of saying yes to every financial request. Those previous expenses were gifts I chose to give. This is a loan you're asking for, and I'm declining to provide it. "Mom, what is going on with you lately? First you're weird about visit scheduling. Now you're refusing to help when we have a genuine emergency. Jessica thinks you're going through some kind of midlife crisis or something." The suggestion that my newfound boundaries represented a psychological crisis rather than healthy self-advocacy revealed how thoroughly David had been trained to see my compliance as normal and my autonomy as problematic. "I'm not going through a crisis. I'm making different choices about how I spend my time and money." "Different choices?" "Mom, we're family. Family helps each other. This is how relationships work." "Actually, David, healthy relationships involve mutual support. For the past several years, the support has been flowing in only one direction." "That's not fair. I've been building my career, getting established. You knew that phase of life would require extra help from family. I always planned to pay you back when I was more financially secure." "When might that be?" "What do you mean? When will you be financially secure enough to stop needing help from your parents?" Another long pause. "I don't know. That's a weird question. Most families support each other ongoing. It's not like there's a specific cutoff date for family assistance. Most families have reciprocal relationships, David. The support flows both ways, based on changing needs and circumstances." "Are you saying I don't support you guys? Because that's ridiculous. I call regularly. I visit when I can. I care about what's happening in your lives. You called once during your father's 5-day hospitalization. You've visited twice in the past 4 months. Your idea of caring seems to involve a lot of assumptions about our availability and very little concern for our actual needs." "Oh my God, Mom, you're really going to hold the honeymoon thing over my head forever? We've talked about this. Jessica and I couldn't just cancel our plans and fly home. It wouldn't have changed anything about Dad's medical treatment. It would have changed everything about your father's emotional experience during the worst health crisis of his life." "That's emotional manipulation, Mom. You're trying to make me feel guilty for having a life outside of your medical emergencies." The conversation was escalating in a way that felt familiar but different. Usually, when David pushed back against my concerns, I would apologize and find ways to accommodate his perspective. This time, I held steady. "I'm not trying to manipulate your guilt. I'm explaining why I've decided to prioritize your father's needs and my own well-being over your financial convenience." "Fine. You know what? I'll figure this out myself. But I want you to know that Jessica is really hurt by your attitude lately. She feels like you've rejected her, and honestly, I'm starting to agree with her." "What specifically has Jessica told you?" She says you're cold and unwelcoming. You put restrictions on our visits. You were rude to her on the phone, and now you're refusing to help when we have a genuine crisis. She doesn't understand what she did wrong. Jessica hasn't done anything wrong, but she also hasn't done much right. In 3 years of dating and marriage to you, she's shown very little interest in our family beyond what we can provide for her comfort and convenience. That's incredibly unfair. Jessica loves our family. Jessica loves the idea of having supportive in-laws who are available when needed and unobtrusive when not needed. That's different from loving actual people with their own needs and limitations. I can't believe you're saying this. You're talking about my wife like she's some kind of gold digger. I'm talking about your wife like she's someone who has never learned that relationships require mutual investment and consideration. You know what, Mom? I think I need to take a break from these conversations. You're being incredibly hurtful, and I don't think this is good for any of us. That's your choice, David. It is my choice. And until you're ready to apologize for the way you've been treating Jessica and me, I think we need some space. I understand. I'm serious, Mom. This isn't just a threat. I'm not going to keep calling and visiting if you're going to be hostile and unsupportive. I hope you'll change your mind eventually, but I respect your decision. The call ended with David clearly expecting me to panic and call him back with apologies and promises to reconsider the loan. When that didn't happen, Jessica called the next evening. "Margaret, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," she began, her tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable and conciliatory. "David told me about your conversation, and I'm worried that our relationship has gotten off track somehow." "What specifically concerns you, Jessica?" "Well, it seems like you're upset about something, but David and I can't figure out what we've done wrong. We've tried to be respectful of Robert's health needs. We've been flexible about visit scheduling, and we certainly never expected you to sacrifice your own financial security to help us with our car situation." The reframing was masterful. Jessica was positioning herself and David as the reasonable parties who had been accommodating and understanding, while suggesting that my concerns were mysterious and possibly irrational. "Jessica, let me be very clear about something. Your husband abandoned his dying father during a medical crisis to protect his vacation plans. That's not a misunderstanding or a communication problem. That's a character issue." "Margaret, that's really harsh. David was trying to balance multiple important commitments. He couldn't have predicted that Robert would have complications during our honeymoon. He could have prioritized family over recreation when I specifically told him his father might not have much time left. But you've said before that Robert's treatment was going well. David thought this was just another routine setback, not a life-threatening emergency." The gaslighting was subtle, but unmistakable. Jessica was attempting to rewrite history, suggesting that I had downplayed Robert's condition when the opposite was true. "Jessica, I want you to understand something clearly. The days of treating my home like a hotel and my resources like a bank account are over. If you and David want a relationship with us, it will be based on mutual respect and genuine concern for our well-being. Of course we want that. But Margaret, it feels like you're punishing us for not being mind readers. How were we supposed to know that you wanted different types of interactions with us? You might have asked. In 3 years, neither of you has ever asked what Robert and I need or how you could support us during difficult times. Well, we're asking now. What do you need? How can we fix this?" It was a reasonable question, but the timing felt strategic rather than genuine. Jessica was asking how to repair the relationship only after their financial request had been denied and their access to family resources had been restricted. I need David to understand that his parents are people with their own needs, not just resources for his convenience. I need both of you to show genuine interest in our lives, not just contact us when you want something. And I need you to stop treating Robert's illness like an inconvenience to your social plans. Those all seem very reasonable. I think we can definitely work on those things. Good. We'll see how it goes. But something in Jessica's quick agreement felt hollow. as if she were calculating the minimum behavioral changes required to restore access to family support rather than genuinely reconsidering her approach to relationships. 3 weeks passed with minimal contact from David and Jessica. The silence was initially peaceful. Robert and I enjoyed quiet dinners, gentle walks in our neighborhood, and conversations that weren't interrupted by demands for financial assistance or emotional labor. But I could see that Robert missed David, even if he didn't say so directly. "Do you think he'll come around?" Robert asked one evening as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset. "I think David will contact us when he needs something," I replied. "The question is whether we'll respond the same way we always have." I was right. The call came on a Thursday morning in early August. David's voice was strained and urgent. "Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad immediately. Can Jessica and I come over tonight? This is really important." "What's going on?" "I can't discuss it over the phone, but it's serious and we need family support right now." Despite my growing boundaries, the maternal instinct to protect my child during crisis kicked in immediately. "Of course, come for dinner at 6. They arrived 15 minutes early, both looking stressed and exhausted. Jessica's usually perfect appearance was disheveled, and David had dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice," Jessica said as they settled into our living room. Her tone was more subdued than I'd ever heard it. "What's wrong?" Robert asked, leaning forward in his chair with concern. David took a deep breath. "I'm being investigated at work. The State Bar Association received a complaint about client fund mismanagement, and the firm has suspended me pending a full audit of my cases." The words hit like a physical blow. "David, what does that mean exactly?" "It means someone accused me of stealing client money, which I didn't do, obviously, but the accusation alone is enough to destroy my career. Even if I'm cleared completely, no other firm will hire me with this kind of cloud over my background." Jessica reached for David's hand. "We've retained a defense attorney, but the legal fees are going to be enormous. Plus, David's not receiving salary during the suspension, so we have no income." "How long might this investigation take?" Robert asked. "Months, maybe a year, and that's if everything goes well." David's voice cracked slightly. "Dad, I'm scared. Everything I've worked for, everything we've built, could be gone." My heart broke watching my son face the possibility of losing his career and reputation. Despite our recent conflicts, seeing him genuinely frightened and vulnerable brought out every protective instinct I'd ever had as his mother. "What do you need from us?" I asked. "We need financial help," Jessica said bluntly. "Significant help. The defense attorney wants a $50,000 retainer, and we need living expenses until this gets resolved. We're looking at maybe $75,000 total." The number was staggering. Even with my newfound awareness of our financial resources, $75,000 represented a major expenditure that would require liquidating investments. "We'll mortgage our apartment if we have to," David added quickly. "But the legal bills need to be paid immediately, and banks won't approve a mortgage while I'm under investigation." Robert and I exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of family crisis that justified dipping into savings and making sacrifices to help our child. "Let us think about this overnight," I said. "We'll figure out how to help." The relief in David's face was profound. "Thank you. I know we've had some tension lately, but this proves that when it really matters, family comes through for each other." After they left, Robert and I sat in our kitchen discussing options. We could liquidate some of the investment assets I'd recently discovered, or take out a home equity loan, or combine several approaches to raise the necessary funds. "It's a lot of money," Robert said, "but if David's career is at stake, we have to help." "Absolutely. I'll call the financial advisor tomorrow and start the process." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the conversation nagged at me, though I couldn't identify what. David and Jessica had seemed genuinely distressed, and the situation they described was certainly serious enough to warrant their emotional state. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to my home office to research David's law firm online. Morrison, Klein & Associates had a substantial web presence with detailed profiles of all their attorneys and recent news about major cases and firm developments. David's profile was still active on their website with no indication of suspension or investigation. That seemed odd. Most firms would remove an attorney's information immediately if they were facing ethics violations. I searched for recent news about the firm and found several articles about their successful defense of a major corporate client and their expansion into new practice areas. Nothing about internal investigations or ethics complaints. A cold suspicion began forming in my mind. I opened my laptop and started searching for David Thompson in connection with legal disciplinary actions, state bar investigations, and ethics complaints. Nothing appeared in any public records. I searched for Jessica's name in connection with her supposed job at the marketing firm she'd mentioned. Her LinkedIn profile showed she'd been between opportunities for the past 4 months. The pieces of a disturbing picture began coming together. David and Jessica had told us they needed $15,000 for car repairs and honeymoon debt. When that request was denied, they disappeared for 3 weeks. Now they were back with a much larger crisis requiring $75,000. At 7 a.m., I called Morrison, Klein & Associates and asked to speak with David Thompson. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Thompson is no longer with the firm," the receptionist said. "His employment was terminated 6 weeks ago. May I direct you to another attorney?" My blood turned to ice. Was he suspended pending an investigation? "I'm not able to discuss personnel matters, ma'am, but there's no ongoing investigation that I'm aware of." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, trying to process what I'd discovered. David had been fired from his job 6 weeks ago, around the time of his first request for financial assistance, and had been lying to us about his employment status ever since. The elaborate story about ethics investigations and state bar complaints was completely fabricated. David and Jessica had invented a crisis designed to extract a large sum of money from parents they viewed as a reliable source of financial rescue. When Robert woke up, I showed him what I'd discovered. His face went through the same progression of confusion, disbelief, and hurt that I was experiencing. "Maybe there's an explanation," he said weakly. "Maybe he was fired, but there really is an investigation that the firm doesn't want to acknowledge publicly. Robert, I think we both know what this is." At 10 a.m., David called to check on our progress with arranging the loan. "Mom, I know $75,000 is a huge amount, but Jessica and I have been talking, and we really appreciate how you're stepping up during this crisis. It means everything to us." "David, I called your law firm this morning." The silence on the other end was deafening. "I know you were fired 6 weeks ago. I know there's no investigation, no state bar complaint, and no legal fees. I know you've been lying to us about everything." "Mom, I can explain." "No, you can listen. I'm going to tell you some things about our family's financial situation that you've never known." Over the next 10 minutes, I explained about my grandmother's inheritance, the investment accounts, the rental properties, and the $2.6 million in assets that belonged to me. David's attempts to interrupt became less frequent as the magnitude of my wealth became clear. "You've spent years treating your father and me like we were struggling financially while I had millions of dollars in accounts I'd forgotten about. You've borrowed money we didn't need to lend, accepted financial gifts that represented no sacrifice for us, and built your entire adult life around the assumption that your parents were financially vulnerable." "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I forgot, David. I was so busy taking care of you and your father that I lost track of my own resources. But now I remember exactly what I own and exactly what I'm worth." "Okay, so that's actually good news, right? If you have that kind of money, then helping us with our real financial problems shouldn't be a burden." The audacity took my breath away. Even caught in an elaborate lie, David was still calculating how to access my resources. "Our real financial problems? David, you lied about being under investigation. You lied about legal fees and defense attorneys. You invented an entire crisis to manipulate money from your parents. We are in financial trouble. I lost my job. Jessica's been unemployed for months, and we can't make our rent or car payments. The investigation story was just a way to make you understand how serious our situation is. So you thought lying about ethics violations and career destruction was preferable to simply asking for help honestly? I thought you'd be more likely to help if you understood that this wasn't our fault, that we weren't just irresponsible with money. David, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have nearly $3 million in assets. I own rental properties that generate more monthly income than your father's salary. I could have paid for your education, your wedding, and every financial emergency you've ever had without borrowing a single dollar or sacrificing anything meaningful. That's incredible, Mom. I'm so proud of you for building that kind of security. I didn't build it, David. I inherited it from my grandmother 15 years ago and forgot about it because I was so focused on taking care of you and your father. Well, however you got it, this is amazing news for our whole family. David, you're not listening. This money is mine. And as of today, you're no longer in my will. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. What do you mean? I mean, I'm removing you as a beneficiary from all my accounts, investments, and property. When I die, you won't inherit a single dollar. Mom, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. But I'm your son. I'm your only child. Yes, you are. And you've just demonstrated that you view me primarily as a source of financial support rather than as a person worthy of honesty and respect. Mom, please, I know I screwed up with the investigation story, but we really are in trouble. Jessica's pregnant. Even in the midst of my anger, this revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jessica's pregnant? 8 weeks. We just found out last week. That's part of why we're so desperate for financial help. We're going to have a baby to support. I looked at Robert, who was staring at David with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of joy at the prospect of becoming a grandfather and heartbreak at the circumstances surrounding the announcement. Congratulations, I said quietly. But David, the fact that you're going to be a father makes your dishonesty even more concerning, not less. What do you mean? I mean you're about to raise a child and you need to decide what kind of values you want to model. Do you want to teach your baby that family members are resources to be manipulated? Do you want to show them that lying is acceptable when you need something? Of course not. But Mom, people make mistakes when they're desperate. I was scared about providing for Jessica and the baby, and I made poor choices. But we can work through this. We can work through it, David. But not with you as my financial beneficiary. If you want your child to inherit anything from me, you'll need to demonstrate that you can be honest, respectful, and genuinely interested in our relationship rather than just our resources. So what does that mean exactly? It means you're starting over. You get nothing from me financially until you prove that you value our family relationships for reasons other than money. Mom, this is crazy. You're punishing your future grandchild because you're angry at me. I'm protecting my future grandchild from learning that manipulation and dishonesty are acceptable ways to treat family members. That afternoon, I called James Morrison and scheduled an emergency appointment to revise my will. By the end of the week, David was removed as a beneficiary from every account, policy, and asset I owned. The money would go to Robert first, then to charitable organizations focused on cancer research and family support services. If David wanted his child to inherit anything from me, he would have to earn it through years of demonstrated change in his character and priorities. For the first time in 28 years, my love for my son was no longer unconditional. 6 months have passed since I removed David from my will, and the changes in our family dynamic have been profound. The immediate aftermath was exactly what I expected. Anger, disbelief, and desperate attempts to restore the previous relationship without acknowledging the fundamental problems that had led to my decision. David called repeatedly during the first few weeks, alternating between apologies for lying about the investigation and arguments about why removing him from my inheritance was an overreaction. Jessica left several voicemails explaining that they'd found jobs and were getting their finances under control, as if employment status was the core issue rather than the pattern of dishonesty and exploitation. "Mom, I get that you're upset about how we handled things," David said during one particularly lengthy phone conversation. "But cutting me out of your will completely? That's going to hurt your grandchild more than it hurts me. My grandchild will benefit from having parents who understand that relationships require honesty and mutual respect," I replied. "If you want to change my mind about the inheritance, you'll need to demonstrate those qualities consistently over time." "How much time? What exactly do I need to do to prove myself?" The transactional approach to earning forgiveness revealed that David still didn't understand the fundamental issue. He was viewing my requirements as a checklist to complete rather than a genuine transformation in how he approached family relationships. "David, the fact that you're asking for specific tasks to perform tells me you're still not ready for a different kind of relationship with us." Robert's health stabilized beautifully once we removed the stress of David's constant financial crises and emotional manipulation. Without the pressure of accommodating emergency visits and managing complex family drama, Robert could focus entirely on his comfort and our marriage. His pain levels decreased, his appetite returned, and his spirits lifted dramatically. "I feel like I got my wife back," he told me one evening as we sat together reading in our living room. "For years, it seemed like you were always worried about David or dealing with some crisis he'd created. Now you're just here with me." We used part of the inheritance money to pay off our mortgage completely and renovate our home to accommodate Robert's physical needs as his condition progressed. We installed a walk-in shower, widened doorways, and created a comfortable first-floor bedroom suite so Robert wouldn't need to climb stairs on difficult days. More importantly, we began traveling together, something we'd rarely done during David's adult years because our finances were always strained by his needs. We visited national parks, took a cruise to Alaska, and spent a week in Ireland exploring the small towns where my grandmother had been born. "I wish we'd done this sooner," Robert said as we stood on the cliffs of Moher, watching waves crash against the ancient rocks below. "All those years we could have been taking trips like this instead of worrying about David's next financial crisis." The rental income from my properties provided more than enough for our daily expenses, allowing Robert to retire early from the insurance company without any financial stress. Instead of spending his remaining healthy time working at a job he'd never particularly enjoyed, he could pursue hobbies, spend time with friends, and focus on experiences that brought him joy. I also discovered that having financial security changed my entire approach to relationships with other people. No longer operating from a mindset of scarcity and sacrifice, I could be genuinely generous with friends and community organizations without feeling like I was depriving my own family of resources. I established a scholarship fund at the local community college for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. I made significant donations to the cancer treatment center where Robert received his care. I sponsored holiday meals for families dealing with medical crises, remembering how alone I'd felt during Robert's hospitalization while David was on his honeymoon. The freedom to give based on my own values rather than family obligation was transformative. For the first time in my adult life, I could see how my resources might benefit people beyond my immediate family circle. David and Jessica's baby was born in late March, a beautiful little girl they named Emma. Despite everything, becoming a grandmother stirred powerful emotions and made me question whether I'd been too harsh in my response to their dishonesty. "She looks just like David did as a baby," Robert whispered when we visited the hospital, holding our granddaughter for the first time. The love in his eyes was unmistakable, and I felt my own heart swell with protective tenderness for this innocent child. But spending time with David and Jessica at the hospital also reinforced my conviction that the inheritance changes had been necessary. Even during their daughter's birth, they couldn't resist making comments about our improved financial situation, and how nice it would be for Emma to have grandparents who could provide opportunities. "We've been thinking about Emma's future," Jessica said as I held the baby. "Private schools, college savings, maybe a trust fund. I know you and Robert will want to be involved in giving her the best possible start in life." The assumption that we would automatically fund Emma's entire future without any discussion of values, expectations, or David and Jessica's own parental responsibilities revealed that parenthood hadn't fundamentally changed their approach to family relationships. "Emma is beautiful," I replied carefully. "We'll certainly want to be part of her life and support her development. But that support will depend on the kind of relationship we build with all of you." Over the following months, David and Jessica made sporadic efforts to demonstrate the changes I'd requested. They visited more regularly, though the conversations often felt stilted and performative. David would ask detailed questions about Robert's health and my daily activities, but his attention seemed focused on saying the right things rather than genuine interest in our lives. "How are you feeling about retirement, Dad?" he asked during one visit, his tone suggesting he'd prepared the question in advance. "It's wonderful," Robert replied. "Your mother and I are planning a trip to Scotland next month. We want to see the Highlands while I'm still strong enough to do some hiking." "That sounds expensive," Jessica interjected. "Are you sure that's wise with all the medical costs you must be dealing with?" The comment revealed her continued assumption that we were financially struggling and needed to budget carefully for major expenses. David shot her a warning look, clearly having told her to avoid money-related topics during visits. "We're comfortable," I said simply. "The trip is well within our budget." As Emma grew from newborn to infant, I watched David and Jessica's parenting style with growing concern. They seemed to view their daughter primarily as a status symbol and achievement, rather than a person with her own needs and personality. Their conversations about her future focused heavily on the advantages they could provide and the success she would achieve, rather than the character traits they hoped to nurture. "We're already looking at preschools," Jessica announced when Emma was 4 months old. "There's a waiting list for the best programs, and we want to make sure she gets into the right educational track from the beginning." "She's so young," Robert observed. "Maybe focus on helping her feel loved and secure first?" "Of course she feels loved," David replied. "But in today's competitive world, you have to start early if you want your child to have every advantage." The echo of my own approach to David's childhood was unmistakable. I recognized the anxiety about providing opportunities, the focus on external achievements, and the underlying fear that love alone wasn't enough to ensure a child's success and happiness. But I also saw how that approach had shaped David into someone who valued resources over relationships and viewed family members as means to achieve his goals rather than people worthy of consideration for their own sake. "David," I said gently, "what do you hope Emma will learn about family relationships as she grows up?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what kind of values do you want to model for her about how family members treat each other?" David looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing that this was somehow related to our ongoing conflicts, but uncertain how to navigate the question. "I want her to know that family comes first," he said finally, "that we support each other and take care of each other." "That's a beautiful goal," I replied, "and it will require both of you to demonstrate those values in your own relationships, including with Robert and me." As I write this, Emma is 8 months old, and David and Jessica continue their tentative efforts to rebuild trust with us. Some days, their concern seems genuine and motivated by love rather than calculation. Other days, I catch glimpses of the old patterns, the assumption that our resources are available for their convenience, the tendency to prioritize their needs over our boundaries, the subtle manipulation when direct requests don't yield the desired results. Robert's health has remained stable, giving us precious time together that we're using to create memories rather than manage crises. We talk often about what we want to leave behind, not just financially, but in terms of values and relationships. "Do you think David will ever really change?" he asked me recently as we sat in our garden watching the sunset. "I think he's capable of change," I replied. but only if he decides that our relationship is valuable for its own sake, not just for what he can gain from it. And Emma? Emma will learn from watching how her parents treat other people. If David and Jessica can develop genuine respect and consideration for us, she'll grow up seeing that as normal. If they continue to view us primarily as resources, she'll learn that approach to relationships. The inheritance remains in trust for Emma, but with conditions that require her parents to demonstrate sustained change in their approach to family relationships. David and Jessica know the money exists, but they also know it's not automatically available regardless of their behavior. For the first time in my adult life, I'm using my resources, financial, emotional, and temporal, according to my own values and priorities rather than others' demands and expectations. I'm finally the mother I should have been all along, loving but not enabling, supportive but not exploitative, generous but not unlimited. Robert and I are planning another trip next month, this time to Italy, where we'll spend 2 weeks exploring small towns and enjoying food we've never tasted. We can afford this luxury because we're no longer subsidizing adult children who refuse to take responsibility for their own financial decisions. We're building the kind of marriage and life we always wanted but never thought we could have. And if David truly changes, if he learns to value relationships over resources, if he develops genuine respect and consideration for others, if he teaches Emma that family love is based on mutual care rather than financial obligation, then perhaps one day we'll all benefit from the wealth I've accumulated. But if not, Emma will inherit everything when she turns 25, along with a letter explaining why her grandmother chose to prioritize character over entitlement, love over manipulation, and genuine relationships over transactional ones. Either way, I'm finally living according to my own values instead of other people's expectations. And for the first time in 28 years, that feels like enough. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, stay healthy, and value yourselves.